Hello, everyone. Let's wait for everyone to enter the room and we'll welcome you to our webinar. Hope everyone's in good standing today. Lots to learn, and I apologize if you're seeing like a 90s remake video in my video screen. My wonderful son decided to, I don't think he decided, I think it was an accident, dropped my laptop down a few stairs a couple days ago. So if I look like video of Retro Scatman, I apologize. This is what happens when somebody drops your computer. But I have unconditional love for my kid. Do not change our conditions as family members, so everything's good. Well, I'm just gonna be awkward and shoot the breeze until a couple more people get in here, and then I will get right into the webinar. Hey, Coco, glad you made it in. I love that somebody said max headroom vibe. That's also what I was thinking, but I didn't know if anyone would get that reference, so I very much appreciate that. Makes me more interesting. All right. So I was going to bring up my notes here. So welcome to SUNAR's fourth webinar titled Psychedelics and Their Growing Attention for Medical/Therapeutic Use. My name is Steve Caldwell. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm one of the SUNAR's regional peer leads. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to discuss. So this event is being recorded and will be shared on our website and social media within a week. If you're having any technical difficulties, try logging out and rejoining. Please use the chat function to introduce yourselves, a land acknowledgement based on where you are joining us from today, and anything else you'd like would like folks to know about you. If you have any questions or comments for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A box. If your question is directed to a certain speaker in particular, please identify this in your question. We will be saving all the questions to the end. We will be providing a link to an anonymous survey in the chat after the presentation. We would really appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve and grow. If you would like to learn more about SUNAR, please visit our website at sunar.ca or check us out on Facebook, SUNAR Atlantic Region, and Katie will put this in our chat. And now we're going to bring up our land acknowledgement, and that will be followed by a Safer Spaces statement. If you could bring that up for me, Carolyn. Oh, you're very quick. Just a land acknowledgement there, if you don't mind. Thank you. All right, just gonna move my screen so I can see. So SUNAR would like to acknowledge that we are sitting on the unceded and traditional territories of Indigenous people. Together, Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland are traditionally called Mi'kmaq. Our members in Nova Scotia and PEI are situated on the territory of Mi'kmaq. In New Brunswick, we are sitting on the land of the Wolastoqiyik, otherwise known as the Maliseet or Mi'kmaq. We respectfully acknowledge Newfoundland or Unda Humguk in Mi'kmaq as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and the Inuit of Nunatakavut, the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. Oh, sorry, I just have to close that. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we may care for each other in our own way to try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. This is our Safer Spaces statement. In this virtual space, we will treat each other with respect and dignity, regardless of age, race, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, levels of ability, spiritual practices, and all other diverse identities. Everyone entering the space has a responsibility to uphold these values. SUNAR is committed to and encourages all those who gather with us to speak from personal experience and avoid speaking on behalf of others. Try to use I statements to share reactions or experiences such as I feel or I am affected by. Don't make assumptions about others' identity or experiences. Listen to each other so we understand the various perspectives. Share beliefs, opinions, and points of view rather than judgments. Maintain confidentiality. Information shared here should stay here. Maintain confidentiality. Information shared here should stay here. Be mindful of pronouns of others and use them. It is okay to ask if you don't know. We're all here to grow, to connect, and share our experience, knowledge, and light in this space. And thank you for that. I've got a couple more slides to go over just before. Just 1 second. If you want to bring those up for me, Carolyn. So before I introduce our presenters, I want to tell you briefly about SUNAR, the organization hosting this webinar. So Direction 180 receives funds from Health Canada's Substance Use and Addiction Program, SUAP, to create SUNAR, the Substance User Network of Atlantic Regions, in August 2020. The SUNAR project seeks to adapt a peer-led model based on the needs of people with lived and living experience of substance use in 8 communities across 4 Atlantic provinces: Truro, Sydney, and Halifax in Nova Scotia, St. John, Fredericton, and Moncton in New Brunswick, Charlottetown and PEI, and St. John's in Newfoundland. SUNAR aims to unite, inform, and open a dialogue between people who use substances in Atlantic Canada. It also strives to increase engagement between people who use substances and service providers and policymakers to decrease substance use-related stigma and isolation, and increase informed policies, programs, and practices. Ultimately, SUNAR works to enhance and save the lives of people who use or use substances. With the help of key partners, harm reduction organizations throughout Atlantic Canada, SUNAR engages with a network of approximately 40 people with lived experiences using substances to participate in knowledge exchange, skills-based workshops, and other capacity-enhancing activities. We have a monthly newsletter. I think it's really useful. We'll also put a link out to that, and anyone can sign up to receive our monthly newsletter. It's a collection of harm reduction and substance use related resources in Canada with a specific focus on Atlantic provinces. And there's a lot of just beautiful sharing in it, from artwork to personal stories. And I can relate that SUNAR is an extremely well-focused fellowship that really works well together for people. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the mic over to Justin, who is here with his crew from the Halifax Psychedelic Society. And I just really want to honor them and appreciate their knowledge that they're bringing to the room, the discussions we've already had setting this up. And I'm most interested in a selfish way to hear this webinar as well. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, my name is Justin. I'm one of the co-founders of the Halifax Psychedelic Society and the treasurer on the board. A little bit about me. So I was inspired to start this organization out of lived experience with psychedelic drugs myself, and had a lot of challenging experiences when I was younger and didn't really have a community to talk to about that. And when I started to hear about all the emerging research happening, and I went to a couple conferences in the States, saw that this was a growing movement. I thought, you know, I think we need a chapter here in Halifax to be able to host this conversation. So teamed up with Coco and Laslo. They were the early adopters. Yeah, we built out a group. Now, my background, I was a chef for years, and I'm now studying at Dalhousie University, studying sustainability and social anthropology. So when it comes to drug policy, I really look at it a lot more from the social determinants of health and the social construction of our landscapes and how that relates to substance use. So why don't I pass it over to Coco and Laslo to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in. Coco?
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad and honored to be here today to chat about one of my favorite topics. Yeah, my name's Coco. I'm a frontline resident support worker at Out of the Cold Community Association, which is a former emergency winter shelter turned long-term, low-barrier, supportive, permanent housing, which is an amazing project. I'm a long-term lover of harm reduction. I've been involved with a group called the Tea Hive Collective for the past decade as a sitter and organizer. It's a grassroots psychedelic peer support collective of volunteers that work primarily at music festivals and events. But I'll chat a little bit more about that later on. I bring a love of plant medicine into the rest of my life as a plant-based chef and educator and a budding herbalist. And now I'll pass it over to Laslo.
Perfect, thank you. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. A great honor to be in the space with you. So a little about my background. So I'm a master's trained psychotherapist, also a psychiatric nurse. I've been in the public system now for the past 6.5 years, working in various capacities within the public health system. A little bit about my background. So I've been trained in psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy through an organization on the West Coast called Therapeutic. As well, did some training in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy through an organization called Polaris Insight. So they're a clinic based out of San Francisco. And just here today as a member of the board of the Halifax Psychedelic Society, having a passion as a harm reduction advocate and wanting to share information and research in the psychedelic space. So we're looking forward for the opportunity today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And if you could go on to the next slide, Laslo. Okay, so what's on the agenda for today? We're going to talk about who we are and what we do as an organization. We're going to explore psychedelics through a scientific and medical lens. What are they? How do they work? And what does psychedelic therapy look like? We're going to have a discussion of harm reduction strategies. And we'll look at the path, look towards the future. What is a path towards legalization of psychedelic therapy? And what does that mean for accessibility? Next slide. Oh, and lastly, we will end with a Q&A. I did want to mention, if we can't get to everybody's questions, please reach out to us anytime after by email, or you can message us on our Facebook group. One of our board members, TR, who couldn't be here today, he's working on starting a podcast for our organization. So if we have particular topics or common questions, that gives us prompts for that podcast series. So if there's anything we can't get to today, just know that we really want to answer those questions from the community. So send them our way. So a little disclaimer. The health-related information in this presentation is provided as an information resource only and not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information should not be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis and treatment. Never disregard your doctor's advice or delay treatment because of what you have heard from us. Listeners should consult their own physicians concerning the recommendations on this website, in that presentation. We do not provide illegal substances, nor do we offer connections to suppliers. Any possession of illegal substance, discussion of where to acquire them, or produce illegal substances is not allowed at our events. Violators of this will be asked to leave. We do not promote or encourage illegal activity. Even though this is crystal clear on our website, we get regular emails asking us where can we find mushrooms, where can I get acid? Somebody even found my personal telephone one time and texted me saying, hey, you were with the Halifax Psychedelic Society, can you help me find some acid? It blows my mind how people think that that's what we do, so we just have to throw that out there. We do not condemn or condone the use of illegal substances. We as an organization are dedicated to harm reduction and policy reform activities that take place within the existing legal frameworks. So who is HPS? And first, what is a psychedelic society? So if you see here on this map, this is from the Psychedelic Association of Canada website. This is a map of all the psychedelic societies around the world. There may even be more. So psychedelic societies range from grassroots groups to formal institutions. everything from groups that host potlucks and film screenings to formal nonprofits. We take both a bottom-up and top-down approach. So what do I mean by that? We really started as wanting to be, grassroots peer support, host film screenings, host discussions around this topic, knowing that it's quite taboo and there haven't always been safe spaces to have these conversations. But we also saw the importance of including the medical community as this is becoming a topic in a lot of universities. There's a lot of work to be done at the policy level and navigating with health authorities. So we really take both approaches, navigating both streams. We began informally in 2017 and became officially registered as a nonprofit in 2020. So our vision, we envision a world where substance users are informed, safe, supported, and respected, both socially and legally, and where psychedelic therapies are affordable, diverse, and accessible for all who wish to participate. By providing evidence-based education, harm reduction services, policy change, and spreading radical compassion, we believe psychedelics will play a pivotal role in the larger movement of human rights and world peace. So a little quick what we do and what we don't do. So some of our don'ts. We don't, as I mentioned, we don't supply substances or direct people on where to find them. We don't refer people to, quote, underground therapy. This is something we get probably weekly emails asking us, where can I find a psychedelic therapist? Unfortunately, at this time, we cannot support with that. We also do not provide trip sitting services, although this is probably our most frequent request. Now, one thing I would like to say about this is something we've talked quite a bit about and really would like to be able to do someday. When I look at the model of safe consumption sites, the exemption that allows those sites to be able to provide that type of support is the same exemption that we would need to be able to provide trip sitting supports. But unfortunately, without a criminal code exemption, us facilitating direct supervision of consumption puts us in a precarious position and puts us in a position where we're also breaking the law. So just know that that is something that we would love to be able to support folks with. It is a very, very common request that we get, but at this time, trip sitting is not something that we can do. But some things that we do, host film screenings and discussions, organize lectures and conferences, lead harm reduction trainings. We network with health authorities and licensing bodies and navigate the paths towards legal therapies. And to give an example about a type of event we've done in the past and would love to do again was something we did called Psychedelic Stories. So we were at a local venue and we had people come up on stage and share their own stories of their substance use. And it was a really beautiful experience. Some stories were funny, some were sad, but people were laughing and crying together. And we really just want to create spaces where folks can share and connect, especially around psychedelics. They've been, it seems, more taboo than other substances. You know, we've had support groups for other drugs or alcohol for many, many years, yet psychedelics have been taboo. So we hope to create those spaces for those conversations. And so that's just a little intro about us, and I'll pass it over to Laslo to explain a little more what this is all about.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Justin. Hello, everyone. So part of our intention today is to really offer a psychedelics 101. We know there's a lot of information out there in the popular culture about psychedelics. So this is really open to people who have no prior experience whatsoever. So we're just going to cover some basics here. So if we look at the term psychedelic itself, so this term was coined by a psychiatrist, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, in the 1950s. And this brings together two words, the Greek word psyche for mind and delos for making visible or to reveal. So quite literally meaning mind manifesting. So psychedelics more broadly refer to a class of naturally derived and chemical compounds that induce altered states of consciousness, impacting perception, mood, and numerous cognitive processes. So various classes of psychedelics, the ones we'll focus on today, they're referred to as serotogenic hallucinogens. So in this class, we'll get a bit more into detail about psilocybin, MDMA more specifically. And these are generally considered physiologically safe, meaning they do not lead to overdoses and they do not lead to dependence or addiction. So firstly here, we'll just focus briefly on psilocybin. So chemical name here for phosphoryl N-dimethyltryptamine, commonly referred to as magic mushrooms or shrooms. So subjective experiences can involve alterations in visual imagery, sensory synesthesia, meaning blending of senses, things like tasting blue or hearing soft, mixing of the five senses, feelings of expansiveness, awe, ego dissolution, as well as widely reported mystical experiences. So people refer to these as feelings of oneness with the universe, transcendence. There's a Greek term here, agape, as a Greek word for divine love. So again, capturing these feelings of oneness and expansiveness. Typically, dried mushrooms are commonly consumed orally or as a tea. These dose ranges can be a microdose from 100 milligrams up to 500 milligrams, or a macro dose between 1 to 7 grams. Next, we have here MDMA. Chemical name here is methylene-dioxine methamphetamine, commonly referred to as ecstasy or Molly. So if we look at the subjective experiences here, commonly experiencing a euphoria, heightened empathetic connections with others, increased sense of energy, heightened sensory perceptions, as well as an embodied sense of trust and safety. Typically consumed orally as capsulated powder or a pill, and the dose range here can go from 60 to 200 milligrams commonly. And so this is a slide here, which I believe is very important, and not a lot of attention here around the decolonization of psychedelic psychotherapy. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a rich indigenous tradition of using psychedelics, plant medicines for therapeutic purposes, each with their own unique cosmology, epistemology, their own unique knowledge base in the culture. I think this is important to refer to. I think we could spend a whole webinar on this, and I think it's important to bring into the space. Oftentimes, folks who go to these psychedelic conferences, there's typically white middle-aged scientists or physicians dominating the space in these conferences. So I think it's important to acknowledge the rich tradition that is here. So various psychoactive plants, including psilocybin, were commonly used in pre-Columbian Mesoamerican societies, including the Olmec, Zapotec, Maya, and the Aztec cultures. The use of the hallucinogenic cactus peyote, used by Native Americans in the American Southwest and North Mexico, evidence dating back to as far back as 5,700 years ago. Also ayahuasca, and Amazonian plant medicine, which has strong hallucinogenic properties, has a long history of use among the Shipibo people in Peru. As well, ibogaine, a traditional psychedelic indigenous to Central Africa, has been used throughout Gabon, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the Republic of Congo. And we're just going to take a brief history of psychedelic psychiatry in the West. It creates a context of where we got to in this current moment. So this would have started with the pioneering work of English psychiatrist Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who in 1951 became the deputy director of psychiatry at the Wellburn Mental Hospital in Saskatchewan. And not commonly known that Dr. Osmond collaborated with Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, who was the discoverer of LSD or acid. And by the end of the 1960s, he treated over 2,000 patients for alcoholism with LSD and adjunctive psychotherapy. And in these reports, they found that 40 to 45% of individuals remained sober from alcohol after 1 year. So between 1950 and 1965, Dr. Osmond treated approximately 40,000 patients, prescribing LSD for a range of psychiatric conditions. And during this time, over 1,000 scientific papers were published and 6 international conferences. And Dr. Osmond's model of LSD-assisted psychotherapy was endorsed by the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous at the time, and the director of Saskatchewan's Bureau on Alcoholism. So we take a walk down memory lane that these promising early studies were radically halted by Richard Nixon with the war on drugs policy, which is very well known now. And so by 1962, the US Congress passed new drug and safety regulations, and the Food and Drug Administration designated LSD as an experimental drug and enforced limitations on research. So psychedelics more broadly became associated with the hippie counterculture and the anti-war movement, and thus there was the politicalization of these substances, resulting in very swift and measured political scapegoating by President Nixon. And it wasn't until the 1990s that clinical trials reemerged, specifically with psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine, with the renewed interest on the neurobiological effects and the potential therapeutic applications. So I just want to take a little time over the next few slides here, just give a very broad overview of the current state of the research within psychedelics. Now, again, we could spend a whole webinar on research alone, but I just want to provide a very high level review here. So we have a systematic review done by the Imperial College in London. They have their own Center for Neuropsychopharmacology and Psychedelic Research. And so within this study here, they synthesized 16 scientific papers representing 10 independent studies on psychedelic assisted therapy. So within these, 7 were for psilocybin, 2 with ayahuasca, 1 with LSD. And so across these studies, so these totaled 188 patients suffering a range of psychiatric conditions, including cancer or illness-related anxiety or depressive disorders, major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, as well as substance use disorders. So within this research, they demonstrated long-lasting therapeutic gains, even from 1 to 3 sessions. So excerpt from this study showed that for psilocybin therapy, specifically for cancer patients, they demonstrated an average clinical response rate for 83% for anxiety and 78% for depression at 6-month follow-up. So we've got another research journal here looking at meta-analyses of various placebo-controlled trials with psychedelic assisted therapy, released just a few years ago, Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. So they took data from 9 randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, which is seen as the gold standard for research. 2 of these examining psilocybin, 1 for LSD, 1 ayahuasca, and 5 for MDMA. And so within this research, totaling 211 patients with a range of clinical presentations from PTSD, anxiety, depressive disorders, from life-threatening illness, unipolar depression, as well as social anxiety among autistic adults. And so they found quite statistically significant results from these studies across these presentations. And they found that there was an 80% probability that a randomly selected patient undergoing psychedelic assisted therapy would have a better outcome than someone who is randomly selected with a placebo. So again, demonstrating statistical significance with the positive outcomes with these treatments. And just finally here, I want to draw some attention with the psychedelic therapy for PTSD with MDMA. And so this has been happening in the United States with the FDA designating MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD as a breakthrough therapy. And so their phase 3 trials were granted expanded access in December 20th of 2019. And this is a very unique case where the FDA recognized PTSD as an urgent and life-threatening condition for patients who didn't have promising treatment options. And the data that they used was the high risk of suicide among veterans with PTSD. So this was able to fast track MDMA going into the phase 3 clinical trials. And so this pioneering research was really advocated by the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, known as MAPS. And so they completed phase 2 trials with 107 participants diagnosed with chronic treatment-resistant PTSD, suffered from PTSD for an average of almost 18 years. And after 3 sessions of the MDMA therapy, they found that 56% no longer qualified for the diagnosis of PTSD 2 months following. And at the 12-month follow-up, 68% no longer met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And actually, I had to update this part of the slide right before that early in the month that MAPS released that they were celebrating that they received statistically significant results from their phase 3 trials. So this is with 104 participants with PTSD, and the results aren't published yet. So this is going to be put forward in a peer-reviewed journal later this year, but they did put out an email saying that they were very excited in celebrating the results. And so they're going to be moving forward with submitting FDA treatment approval for MDMA psychotherapy, which they expect could be approved as soon as early 2024 in the US. Just want to talk a little bit about psychedelic psychotherapy in practice and what this looks like in a medical context. So typically phase 1 of this would be preparation, which could last anywhere from 3 to 6 sessions. And this would look like a regular therapy sessions, mainly here assessment for medical and therapeutic readiness, excluding folks with primary psychotic disorders, bipolar disorder, history of psychoses, also needs some attention as well, currently taking antidepressants, and in general, assessing readiness. Establishing therapeutic rapport is also very important in this stage, as well as the preparation and shaping of intentions. And this is often what marks the difference between psychedelics within a therapeutic context versus recreational, with a therapeutic context having very specific intentions of what folks want to work with. So during this phase, the exploring of values, beliefs, and life circumstances, defining what the therapeutic focus is, as well as guiding cognitive and emotional processes that may emerge during the psychedelic experience, and preparing folks for what may come in the medicine journey. And also offering preparation for the dosing session, offering a bit of education on what to expect. There is a common metaphor or guided meditations can be used, diving for a pearl in the dark ocean, helping certain processes to prepare for the dosing session. And one of the models that is commonly used is ACE. So this notion of accept, connect, and embody. And so these are some things that would go a bit deeper in these therapy sessions. So in these pictures here, we have a couple of folks who are experiencing a dosing session Looks like the top one would be a ketamine dosing session and the bottom one, psilocybin. And so this would be the dosing experience. So here, ensuring a safe, calm setting that's aesthetically conducive to the experience is important. Minimal interactions with the client and therapist during this time. Practice of being with as a guide to assist if any difficult experiences come up. This may be more relational for MDMA or ketamine oftentimes, where there could be some like talking happening. Whereas with psilocybin, this is often an internal journey. So with psilocybin, dosing session could be between 6 to 7 hours. Ketamine can be under an hour, and then MDMA could be about the same, like six to 8 hours. So with the dosing for psilocybin, with the Therasil clinical protocol organization I received training with, the 5-gram dose is considered the therapeutic dose. And this is commonly done with the sensory deprivation, so blindfold and music to help guide the inward journey. And the music is carefully curated to match the experience, what a person will be experiencing in the medicine journey. And also post-session factors to consider will be the emotional and physical stability of the client post-session, some early integration practices, and ensuring that there are social supports just to aid in like the logistics after the session, getting a ride home, and supporting the integration process afterwards. So final phase here, we have phase 3. This would be integration. And this could be the weeks and months following the dosing experience. So ongoing therapy sessions will be used to help unpack the psychedelic experience as it related to their intention, and support further processing of thoughts and emotions that may arise. And we have listed here just a few like therapeutic modalities used in the integration process. We have internal family systems, logotherapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. And in this process, deepening connection with community is very important. Integration groups can help foster a sense of connection, meaningful supports as making meaning with what they experienced. Body work and creative expression, art, dance, writing, yoga, tai chi, meditation, massage can be very helpful during this phase. And in reinforcing and strengthening core themes that came up during the medicine journey, supporting with the practice of mindfulness, self-compassion, and gratitude. All right, I'll hand it over to Coco.
Amazing. Thank you, Laslo. Yeah, so before I get into this next part, I want to acknowledge that the kinds of therapy and psychotherapy that Laslo's just outlined is not accessible to everyone, especially for marginalized groups who have historically been oppressed by those systems, chronically or underwaged, not given the same opportunities as more privileged folks. So it's expensive. There's a lot of red tape to navigate to actually get into those spaces and those programs. And that brings us to the next point, which is, acknowledging this, while we, again, do not condemn or condone the use of any illegal substances, we know that some folks will make that choice to do so anyway. So this is where harm reduction comes into the picture. So I just want to read from the National Harm Reduction Coalition's website, which is national being in the US, but I think it's still appropriate here. So it says, harm reduction is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with substance use. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use substances. Because harm reduction demands that interventions and policies designed to serve people who use substances reflect specific individual and community needs, there is no universal definition or formula for implementing harm reduction. So basically, Harm reduction acknowledges that people use substances and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, full stop. I'm going to paraphrase a few of the principles from the Harm Reduction Coalition's website, just to kind of give you an idea of the scope of what this involves. The harm reduction principles are grounded in non-judgment. So the acceptance that substance use is part of our world, and we can choose to minimize harm in the best ways that we know how, rather than just ignore or condemn it. Also involves the understanding that substance use is complex and nuanced, and it's a spectrum that each person has a different relationship with. It has a focus on human rights, so the quality of individual and community well-being, instead of just pure abstinence being the requirement. A priority for immediate services and resources to be given to people who use substances. Nothing about us without us. And this is an important one that ensures that substance users have a real voice and autonomy in the creation of the programs and the policies that are designed for them. There's a recognition that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, trauma, sex-based discrimination, and so many other social inequalities can affect anyone's vulnerability to drug-related harms. And finally, we don't attempt to minimize or ignore the very real dangers that can be associated with substance use. We're just here to minimize harm however we can. So while Laslo was talking about a more medical process, this harm reduction presentation is going to be from more of a peer support model. So while a lot of these harm reduction organizations often will have a really diverse range of professionals working within them, registered nurses, counselors, the whole spectrum. What is most often offered through harm reduction models is not a replacement for medical care. It's not psychedelic therapy, and it's not psychiatric treatment. It's a very grassroots, peer support, peer-led form of compassion. So a few ways that we see harm reduction come into play are through substance testing, to make sure that you're taking what you want to be taking. Safer use supplies, such as individual snorting straws and different safer supplies. Overdose prevention by sharing information about dosage, about substances in general, and about any tainted substance alerts that may be happening in the community. And also overdose response. So naloxone is used to treat opioid overdoses, for example, and it's available in most pharmacies in Nova Scotia, at least, as part of Mi'kma'ki. So please go get trained, and they'll give you a free kit and do carry it on you. Just lastly, a note on this is that harm reduction is not just substance related. So the Tea Hive who I work with, and I'll talk about a little more in a moment, we give out a lot of other supplies that aren't just substance related. So water, electrolytes, sunscreen, snacks, if it's a summer and you're outside, safer sex supplies, anything that's going to reduce harm for folks who may or may not be using substances and forgetting to take care of their bodies. Next slide, please. So here are just a very small list of organizations that I know of that may be helpful if you want to dive in more to harm reduction and research. The first one is the one that I was just talking about. It's a group that I've been working with for the last 10 years. The Tea Hive Collective. It's a local psychedelic peer support group, harm reduction group that goes to music festivals and other events with a geodesic dome full of soft blankets and beautiful textures and tapestries, 3 very specifically blended teas, and trained sitters. We have a separate sanctuary space where folks can go if they need more one-on-one care or a break from the buzzing festival atmosphere. But the ground beneath the Tea Hive is the community care and our commitment to expanding the culture of radical compassion. The second organization Laslo already brought up, it's MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're a leading nonprofit research and educational organization that has formed the next organization, which is the Zendo Project. They're another peer support group, psychedelic peer support project, that has greatly inspired the work that we do in the Tea Hive Collective. And we'll talk more about them a few slides later. A few others to mention: DanceSafe. They offer reagent testing kits and also fentanyl testing strips. And they also have information that you can read on their website, but they also offer these little cards that are super helpful to, carry on you and have more information about dosage and what to expect from different substances. TripSit has a really wonderful resource that we always have a big copy of printed in the Hive, which is a drug interactions chart. So essentially, you can plug in 2 different substances and it'll tell you a little bit more about whether that's got a low or high risk associated, whether the 2 substances are synergistic, and it'll increase each one's effects and so forth. The Fireside Project, you can call or text 62-FIRESIDE every day from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. Atlantic time. This is 11 to 11 Pacific time, but we get the good end of that time zone. And you can reach peer support any time of day. There's a psychedelic peer support line, which is staffed by trained, compassionate, non-judgmental volunteers who will provide some emotional support during or after a psychedelic experience. And that's a really wonderful resource to access. And then finally, there's a million resources on psychedelic research, but this is a really good one. Chacruna, the Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, and they're just an amazing resource for current research. Next one, please. Okay, so now we're going to go into, if this is Psychedelics 101, we're going to go into like the very, very, very basics about what happens if you find yourself with a friend, someone you know who needs some support, who's asking for some support. Again, this is harm reduction. We don't condemn or condone, but we want to make sure that our people are safe. So starting at the very basic building blocks, set and setting. Now, this could be an entire workshop on its own. We could do 6-8 hours just on this part alone. So the concept of set and setting was first observed by someone who they call the Johnny Appleseed of LSD, who was a major supporter of LSD in the 1950s, Al Hubbard, while he was visiting mushroom ceremonies in Mexico. Set basically describes the preparation of the journeyer. So their intentions, their mood at the time, any previous experiences with this substance, or the combination of substances. The setting is physical: lighting, the soundscape, the weather, the actual space itself, the social atmosphere, anyone else who might be around, their feelings of safety, and also a person's cultural beliefs. This also tends to include the actual substance taken. What's the dose? What's the duration? What's the purity? Setting, and dose can all really drastically, radically shift every experience. No matter the person's experience with that exact substance or combination of substances, and even that dose, it can be helpful to make a plan beforehand, which includes, things like the desired setup of the space, any music, specific intentions for the journey, any levels of touch. It's really important to ask consent every time because those feelings can change, but it's good to establish a level of comfortability with one another depending on your relationship. And talking through any kind of care plan if things should go sideways. Maybe they want to plan to take a walk if things happen, or that kind of thing. Basically, if you're planning to use a psychedelic substance for the first time, I definitely advise you to do some research about how you can prepare to have a safe and productive trip. And you can do that with the person you're going to be trip sitting as well. We talked a little bit about dosage and interactions with other medicines. Now, again, I want to say I'm not a medical professional, So it's important to do your research. There's two resources that I recommend to start with, which are probably most or many of you know the resource Erowid. Erowid and Tripsit are going to be your good friends here. Erowid has been operating for over 20 years as a website that provides neutral science and experience-based information on many substances and combinations of substances. Just be aware your mileage may vary. Every person is going to have a different experience, but this gives you a baseline or an idea of where you're headed and what to expect. As I just mentioned, Tripsit also offers this amazing resource, the interactions chart, which can be just a quick reference guide before you combine some different substances. And it'll describe whether the risk is low without synergistic effects or with, to use caution, whether it's unsafe or dangerous for whatever reason. And they also on their website have a pretty in-depth fact sheet on over 500 different substances. So it's not a perfect resource, but it does give you a good place to start. Just do your research. So language is really important. This is on to the next point, be neutral, say less. Staying neutral can be so difficult, especially when emotions are involved or when you have a close relationship with the person you're sitting with. Just try to notice your positive and your negative biases and associations with certain things that come up, with certain feelings out of the conversations you have. Words can sometimes make things more complicated or get in the way. So unless your friend is asking to actively engage in dialogue with them about their process, rather than analyzing what's happening with them, listen. Listen with an open mind and an open heart, with curiosity about their experience. Saying less allows the individual to come to their own conclusions. And this will connect with a sitting, not guiding principle we're going to talk about in just a moment. The next one is really important, and it's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned recently in my work as a frontline support worker, is that the best thing you can do for someone who is escalated, having a difficult time, is to regulate your own nervous system. So this can look like finding tools for yourself that help you stay in your body, like a familiar smell, feeling your feet touching the ground, visualization, movement, but the most important is breath. So there's a very simple breathing activity that I've learned and I often come back to. It seems very simple, but it's actually incredibly potent, especially if you're experiencing anxiety or heightened emotions. It's called box breathing. You may have heard of it. It's very simple. You breathe in 4 counts, hold 4 counts, breathe out 4 counts, and hold 4 counts like a box. 4, hold, out, hold. And it's really powerful for just slowing that down and forcing you to really tune into your body and your breath. It's easy to be swept away into a difficult or chaotic journey when it's happening right next to you. But holding yourself in a calm place can really, really help the person that you're supporting and can help them find their own calm and regulated centeredness. It all comes back to this, in my opinion. And if there's one thing as a psychedelic trip sitter that you remember, it's this: just breathe, just come back to your breath. The final thing I want to say about this is energy matching, which is something we use a lot in the tea hive. It's basically, in the tea hive, we serve herbal tea by donation, okay? The blends are specifically chosen to be energizing or calming, to have different effects, basically. But the first interaction that we have with anyone is this invitation for our guests to look inside and ask, how am I doing? How am I feeling? How do I want to feel? This also allows us to kind of check in while making some, non-judgmental observations, just a primary assessment on things like body language. And this triage of sorts allows us to hold better space for our guests in those moments. This also gives us an opportunity to energy match, which is really helpful to really meet our guests where they are, exactly where they are, which is our goal. It's effective if you want to gently bring someone who's very escalated kind of down to a more centered place. Essentially, what you do is you meet someone in a higher energy state, maybe using something like movement or dancing, going for a quick walk, and then gently bring your energy down until you are in a grounded space, like always staying regulated, staying within yourself. But if you bring your energy down, oftentimes the guest will follow. Next slide, please. So the Zendo project is amazing. I highly recommend you go to their website, check out what they have to say. Their whole training manual is there. I just want to say, reading the training manual does not give you everything that you would receive in a training, but it is a really interesting resource to read. Their pillars are incredible. They're listed here. I have my own interpretation of these things that we've been using to give our T-Hive volunteers a little more meat to grab onto. So I'll just go through these now. Basically, the first one is sitting, not guiding. So we encourage our sitters to hold a place of calm acceptance, compassion, non-judgment. It's not our job to fix or to heal anyone. Our goal is to let the guest or your friend to inform what's happening. Let their unfolding experience be the guide. And don't try to get ahead of the process. Just be patient and accepting of exactly where they're at, no matter how you feel or whatever darkness they might bring up. It's important to ask questions that help the individual deepen their experience. So that one's pretty clear. Sitting, not guiding. We're not here to be a guide. We're just here to witness the experience. The second one is to create a safer space. The Zendo project says create a safe space, but I just wanted to amend that a little bit because what is safe may look different for everyone. So we can accomplish this with warm blankets, soft lighting, beautiful things to look at and engage with, and just having your kind and grounded presence there. But it is a good idea to ask what would make them feel the most comfortable, what would feel like a safer place for them, because like I say, safe may look different for everyone. An overstimulated person might want very low light, whereas another person could feel nervous in the darkness. If open-ended questions are difficult, it's okay to ask directly. Can I get you a blanket? Are you feeling cold? Whatever happens, just remind the person that they're in a space where they will be treated with compassion and without judgment, that their experience is welcome and that there are no expectations. The third pillar is talk through, not down. This one kind of connects to the first one in my mind, but basically the job is, without distracting from or minimizing their experience, you can help the traveler connect with how they're feeling by asking questions with curiosity and openness. Try really hard to avoid saying things like everything will be okay or you're not that high. While it might feel like comfort or reassurance, it also might feel patronizing, judgmental, or dismissive of their experience. Especially when things are tense or difficult, it's really important to remind your guests to take those deep breaths and keep moving through. Encourage them to discuss their own emotional strengths. You can also suggest that they use forms of artistic self-expression, writing, drawing, movement that can release energy. Really, any form of expression is welcome. Making noises, crying, singing, talking through what's coming up, even if it doesn't make sense, chanting, whatever makes sense for them. We can actually help the integration process begin here by asking those really neutral, open questions like, what would you like to experience? What would you like to remember from this experience and carry forward? How can this contribute to your growth? All of this only if they're open and welcome to dialogue. Otherwise, just sit and be present. And the fourth and final pillar here is a pretty important one. We often hear, I had a bad trip. And this is just revolves around a bit of reframing of that. Basically, difficult is not necessarily bad. Challenging experiences happen, and they can often wind up being our most valuable. This is not to put a toxic positive spin on this. There can be very scary and destabilizing experiences that happen. But just by being present with this and trying to check our language as sitters, instead of saying things like bad trip, we talk about having a difficult experience, which is very real. This being said, if there's anything you can do to encourage that shift, it's okay to do that. Offer it, like some water, some tea, a piece of fruit, a warmer blanket, a change of scenery or music, a new activity, or even just a different placement of the body. These can all be helpful ways to shift the energy by not trying to change anything, but just take care of some of those more physical needs without distracting from what's actually coming up. Next, please. So this is, in my opinion, the most important part of the whole experience. So the first point there says preparation, experience, integration, embodiment. I like to think of any journey being comprised of 10% preparation, 20% experience, the actual journey and the insight that comes through, 50% integration, what you do with this information after, and then 10% embodiment, the outcome of the integration where the lessons become second nature and ingrained in your somatic experience. The integration begins when you start thinking about your intentions for your journey, and you start working those out, the set and setting pieces, and you start imagining what a successful outcome would be for your journey. But the real work comes after with the integration process, however that works for you. Integration can look like a lot of things. Laslo mentioned quite a few of them that would be part of the psychotherapeutic process, and they don't look a lot different. Individual therapy is really helpful if that's accessible to you. A few examples being cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on shifting unhelpful patterns and behaviors. Laslo mentioned internal family systems, which follows a belief that the mind is made up of many parts and kind of befriending all those parts. Of course, traditional talk therapy can focus on the effects of those past experiences. Somatic experiencing, which explores the body's ability to store and process emotions, experiences, trauma, all of those things. Group therapy, which I hope will become more popular in the years to come, can be really powerful. It's very difficult for guests to return back to a community if they feel that it doesn't understand or support their experience. So it's really important that we as a community are here for each other, to show them that their experience is important to the whole, that if we share our experiences, we can grow as a community and grow collectively. It's important and it's really relevant. Art and expression-based therapies can be really powerful, with or without a therapist, including journaling, music, painting, drawing, poetry, sculpture. A psychiatrist, Emily Williams, I read about, recommending this really interesting practice called the mandala practice, which is taking the time right after using psychedelics as soon as possible to fill a whole page with whatever symbols and colors come to mind. It doesn't matter what you put on the page. It doesn't have to be, it can be abstract or really anything that comes to mind. And then over the next few days, take a look at what you've drawn and try to relate it back to your experience. Finally, movement, dance, breath work, yoga, anything that will help you get into your body. Using a moving meditation will create space for you to connect to yourself, body, spirit, whatever your beliefs. Meditation in general are very aligned with psychedelics and may have super deep therapeutic effects. So practicing mindfulness, in that moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness begins with sitting still and noticing your breath, which again, will be helpful for moving through anything that comes up. Mindfulness in nature is always recommended. For me, it always helps. Especially for those difficult experiences, it's really important that both the journeyer and the sitter are able to process what happened. Any of the suggestions from what I just went through or from Laslo's earlier can work for both you and the journeyer, sitter and journeyer alike. The next part is transforming the bad trip experience. So I want to just read a quote. For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. So this kind of cheesy quote explains it all for me. Growth can be challenging. It can be confusing, destructive, and feel painful. Any difficult or powerful psychological experience, whether it's fueled by a substance or not, can be an opportunity for personal evolution. So just keep in mind, this experience will end. And if you try to analyze it too closely, it's really easy to get into that spinning, spiraling loop. So encourage your friend or yourself to focus on what you feel, what's coming up, and move through so that later you can gain insight. Okay, so just some helpful questions that I found in my journeys and research. I'm just going to go through the list of them so that you can keep those in your back pocket and yeah, even use them for your own experience. Here we go. What are 3 words that best summarize your experience? What feelings are most alive in your body as you reflect on your journey? What felt most challenging? What felt most rewarding? What are key insights, curiosities, or emotions that you've had? What feels most important to you to carry through coming out of this journey? What are some ways that you typically process emotions? What support can you ask from your family, friends, or professionals? Is there anyone who may be able to help you process your emotions? And this last one is really important because I really believe that we're not meant to do this alone. A lot can come up in psychedelic experiences, including past traumas and fears and a whole load of things. So we need to be able to ask for support in our process. And I really believe that. And just onto the last slide, please. So here are just a few resources that if you want to look into offering harm reduction into the world or learning more, these are really powerful resources you can look into. The MAPS Manual of Psychedelic Support is incredible. It's like almost 300 pages. I think it's $20. You can get it from the MAPS website. It's extremely powerful and has so many good nuggets of advice on how to move through these big things that come up. Also, the Zendo training manual, which I said, I believe it's free on their website. You can just look up, you can look it up via MAPS there too. Harmreduction.org, that's the National Harm Reduction Coalition's website where I got those definitions from earlier. And Erowid.org, which is the really amazing resource of all the substances from the last couple of decades. It's got hundreds, maybe 100,000, I don't even know, many thousands of stories and reports and little bits of information. So yeah, I just want to say before I go, if something in this presentation has sparked your desire to offer psychedelic peer support and you want to volunteer your time this summer with the Tea Hive Collective, please reach out to us through Facebook, the Tea Hive Collective, and I'll get back to you through there. A little later in the spring, when we all come out of hibernation, we'll be putting out a call for volunteers for folks who want to work with us this summer. So thank you so much for being here. I want to hand it over to Justin next, who's going to talk a little bit more about looking forward in this very fast growing field. And so thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Coco. And yeah, I just want to reiterate what she said about volunteering with the Tea Hive. Some of my most fond memories have been working with the Tea Hive. It's just a beautiful place, and it's so beautiful to be able to hold space for others. So I just wanted to talk about the path forward. This is something I think a lot about, and I do a lot of research in my studies about, is the regulatory landscape of psychedelics as well as cannabis. So there's pending legislative frameworks required for legal practice outside of clinical trials or Health Canada exemptions. Currently, only ketamine is approved for psychedelic therapy. There are, as it said there, Health Canada exemptions for using different substances. That's something I'm going to passes back to Laslo in a minute to give a little more detail of. But for the most part, psychedelic therapy is not largely available yet. It's still very much in this research stage. As Laslo mentioned, the research is looking promising, and we're probably 1 to 3 years out from bigger adoption into therapeutic treatments. That's to be said. Timelines can never be predicted in that regard, but they're definitely on their way. The increased popularity and demand from the public needs to be met with best practice guidelines for safe and effective practice. Laslo mentioned some of the research that happened in the early days in Saskatchewan. There were, back in the day, research was happening where people were given, 8 hits of acid, 800 micrograms of acid and strapped to a gurney. We've come a long way in how we look at psychedelic treatments, but there needs to be decisions made on what's best practice and what maybe should be avoided, and that's still to be determined in the professional landscape. So some work to be done there. If current research findings on treatment efficacy translate into professional practice, then this will represent significant advancement in mental health treatment. There's a lot of promise here, right? There's a lot of potential here for this to help a lot of people. Now, that said, affordability may prove to be a barrier for accessing treatment due to the intensive model of therapy and the cost of psychedelic medicine. So next slide, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So yeah, once again, the cost. I've had conversations with people within MAPS, for example, looking at what MDMA therapy may cost. And some estimates are upwards of $5,000 to $10,000 for the whole package. When you're looking at the preparation sessions, the sessions, and the integration therapy. But $10,000 is something that how many people can drop, and there's conversations that need to be had about coverage, right? And that's my next point here: a public versus private model. Is it going to be fee for service and you straight up have to pay out of pocket, or are we going to see adoption from insurance providers? And here in Canada, where we have a somewhat socialized healthcare system, could we have coverage coming from our federal funding and provincial funding mechanisms to cover these treatments? There are people doing research, doing cost benefit analysis. That's a lot of the work that MAPS tries to do, especially in the States with Veterans Affairs, looking at how many billions of dollars a year the government spends on PTSD and other mental health treatments for veterans. If you're actually able to help people get better, that's a cost saving for the government. So these are some things that need to be addressed. Now, at the same time, we don't want the government to only see this as a cost saving. This is our mental health we're talking about. It isn't only a numbers game, but those numbers are something that need to be crunched in a lot more detail, especially in Canada, so we can actually make this accessible. Practitioner availabilities across different communities. Now, when we look at practitioners needing to undergo extra licensing to be able to do psychedelic therapy, look at Therasil and other trainings, if that's something that a nurse or a counselor or a therapist needs to pay on their own to be able to get that training, what may happen is there may be disparities across different communities. So if there's a therapist in a low-income community and it's unlikely that people are going to be able to afford treatment, is that person going to pay out of pocket to get the licensing required, if they don't think that they're going to be able to reimburse that? And this theme comes up a lot in the literature around substance use, not even just with psychedelics, but other novel treatments. When a new treatment comes out, if it's required for a health practitioner to pay to get that training, lower income communities are less likely to have practitioners that are even certified in that type of training. So there's a social justice element to this as well, where if you have a fee for service model, there's going to be differences across communities of where this is even accessible. I'd like to talk a little bit about the distinctions between legalization, medicalization, and decriminalization. So this comes up a lot. I'm sure you may hear these terms come along online, especially as some states in the US are decriminalizing certain substances, legalizing certain substances. There's some distinctions here. So decriminalization is when the consumption and possession of a drug is decriminalized, meaning there's no criminal penalty. But that doesn't mean you can just go buy it somewhere. The sale may still have to happen in some sort of underground context. But if you're caught with the possession, there's no criminal repercussions for that. Whereas legalization is when there is a actual regulated environment where you can go and buy those substances. We saw that with cannabis in 2018, I believe, 2019, when the shift happened. And medicalization is somewhere kind of in between, right? Where a doctor can prescribe. We saw this with cannabis for, I think, 13, 14 years before it was fully legal. You could get a prescription from your doctor and then you could access it, but without that prescription, you couldn't go and buy that. So to expand on some of the lessons learned from cannabis, I think is really important, because even though there was a medical program for cannabis for well over a decade, thousands of people still went to jail, and some still in jail for the possession and distribution of cannabis. So is it fair that somebody can get psilocybin from their doctor, whereas somebody that accesses mushrooms outside of the medical framework could still be criminalized? I don't think that is fair. So I think it's really important that we push for decriminalization at the same time as the medicalization. And sometimes online and in books or articles, I see it as this either or, and I really want to advocate for a yes and. I think it's really both, right? I think that there is something really beautiful to developing these medical therapeutic approaches, understanding therapeutic modalities. I think that can really help a lot of people. But because we know this is going to be inaccessible financially and through other versions of that red tape, we need to make sure that people aren't criminalized for their consumption. So decrim and medicalization, I think, is crucial. They have to happen at the same time. Medicalization without decriminalization, I think, is a crime to our communities, and we really have to advocate for that. So that's it. I don't know if I maybe just want to pass it back to Laslo quickly before Q&A to maybe just give a glimpse into what some of those exemptions are right now and what that landscape is, and maybe just like a quick point about how to talk to your doctor. If accessing legal treatments is something you're curious about, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. Yeah, so I guess the way the Canadian government has decided to move forward with psychedelics is medicalization. So the early part of January 2022, the federal government passed something called the Special Access Program. It's the SAP program for short. And so that essentially empowers primary care providers, like psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, so any health practitioner with a prescribing authority is able to prescribe the use of a psychedelic medicine. So in their criteria, they've outlined psilocybin and MDMA specifically, but Health Canada has created a very high burden of proof that the prescriber needs to demonstrate that all other treatments have been exhausted. So an organization called Therapeutic, who I received my training through with the psilocybin therapy, they've really been leading the charge in Canada to keep the federal government in account. So they've actually launched a class action lawsuit against the government as a charter right for people to have access to these treatments. And so they've been advocating it specifically within the context of palliative care, end-of-life distress. So folks who've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, like stage 4 cancer, There's evidence to show that it's been helpful for treatment-resistant depression as well, but also existential distress and anxiety and depression that folks are experiencing. So within this framework, essentially a prescriber needs to put forth an application to Health Canada to authorize it. And so there have been some difficulties with that. Health Canada rejecting certain applications, wanting very specific feedback, wanting references, wanting a very specific clinical rationale. And this has been very challenging for physicians who are very burdened already in the healthcare system. So that's one way. And another means that the government was approving before the special access program was the Section 56 exemptions. And this is Therasil was able to fill out applications for folks, again, primarily with the end stage terminal diagnoses or treatment-resistant depression, to put in an application to Health Canada. So these were being signed off directly by the Federal Minister of Health. But since the SIP program came online, the government has been rejecting these applications and encouraging folks to go through the SIP program, which is, again, putting a burden on doctors, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners to put it forward. And so that's really the landscape at this point. Things are shifting quite fast. There was recent changes with the Alberta provincial government putting together a regulatory framework for psychedelics. Very exciting also that in Quebec, that they've been able to put legislation forward that the MSI billing code for physicians to bill for psilocybin therapy has been put forward thanks to the work of a visionary physician connected with Therasil. And so there is a push within other jurisdictions for there to be these incremental changes towards making it possible. And so one of that is, as Justin mentioned, making it equitable. And so within our socialized healthcare system, finding a mechanism for billing is important. And so that's kind of where we're at this point. And so again, like clinical trials is something people can access, and then otherwise SAP program through your physician. But again, it's a challenging landscape, and so folks can reach out to Therasil. If you look them up, that they have a process, intake process there. If you could potentially qualify for end stage diagnoses or treatment-resistant depression, and otherwise it's having those conversations with your physician and directing them to resources that are out there.
Thanks, Laslo. And yeah, now's a good time. We could stop the recording. That way the Q&A doesn't enter